Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Payan. I'm the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico here at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the halls of the Institute to engage in this town hall meeting on immigration today. As you may know, many of us have been involved in immigration issues for decades, for many different reasons. But if the motivations are many, the purpose is the same. Our country needs immigration reform. We are approaching 30 years since Congress last legislated on immigration, and the system is now clearly outdated and in need of restructuring. This is evident not only by the millions of undocumented residents in our midst, nearly all of whom are gainfully employed and thoroughly integrated into our society, but also by the growing crisis on the southern border. Yet our politicians have failed to hear the message that the American people are sending in favor of change. Over 60% of all Americans support immigration reform, including higher levels of legal migrants and some kind of status for those already here. But we remain gridlocked. So conversations like this one that we will host here today are essential to keep pushing for our government to act. So let me thank all of you for joining us here today. And as with every successful program, our conversation here is a collaborative project. So I want to take a minute to acknowledge our partners and friends, or co-organizers of this event, Children at Risk, the Center for Houston's Future, the Rational Middle, and Lorelle Media. And I also want to thank particularly Stan Merrick, who has been tireless in working to achieve immigration reform in this country for years. We've actually partnered on this for years. And I cannot think of anyone more passionate about this particular issue than Stan Merrick. And also, I also want to thank Linda Lorelle, who will lead our conversation today. She's really been a trooper in organizing this conversation today, and of course Lisa Wakita for all the behind-the-scenes work to piece together our conversation today. So without further ado, let me welcome you and hand the microphone over to our host tonight, Linda Lorelle. Linda. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tony. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. As Tony just said, we have a lot of work to do, right? We have a lot of work to do. So we are here today to put a face on the impact of our broken immigration system, the children and the families whose lives are torn apart. We are here to hopefully separate myth from reality, to inform and inspire every single person in this room to get and stay engaged in this issue that literally has profound implications for the future of our state and our nation. We are here because, as Tony just said, it's time for action. After decades of inaction to fix our broken immigration system, there are clear signs that the American public, certainly all of us in this room, across the political spectrum, want our leaders to pass common sense immigration reform. The National Immigration Forum and the Bullfinch Group conducted a poll in late November of 2022. That poll found that 73% of registered voters, including 70% of self-identified conservatives, support prompt legislative action to provide a permanent solution for dreamers, provide strengthened border security, and provide a pathway to meet farm workforce needs. Jenny Murray, President and CEO of the National Immigration Forum, said this in response to that poll result. She said, quote, "Time is tight, but Americans are not deterred. They want border and immigration reforms now. Congress has bipartisan border, farm workforce, and dreamer solutions ready. Republicans and Democrats should seize this opportunity to serve our nation's interests by passing focused legislation," unquote. Now, since she made that statement toward the end of last year, new legislation has been proposed, and we will get into that during our discussion. In the meantime, I join Tony in saying how appreciative we are that you seized the opportunity to be here with us today. In just a few minutes, we will screen a short film about the impact of our broken immigration system on children and families. I will then introduce our panelists to engage in conversation with them and with you. You are part of this. We have got to talk about the current landscape and the potential solutions, but we can't do that without hearing your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, your concerns. So I will be going into the audience to get you involved in this discussion. All we ask is that you come to this conversation with respect, an open mind, and a willingness to listen and learn from each other. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing Sharon Watkins-Jones, Chief Equity Officer for Children at Risk, one of our hosts today. Ms. Watkins-Jones' career has included positions of leadership in public affairs and higher education administration. She is a former Director of Political Strategies at the ACLU of Texas and Director of Career and Technical Education at Lone Star College System. She is also the owner of Watkins-Jones Political Consulting. Please welcome Sharon Watkins-Jones.
I'm honored to represent Children at Risk in this partnership for such an important town hall discussion. Our CEO, Dr. Bob Sanborn, and our board chair, Donald Bowers, are extremely proud members of the Rice Owl family, as they never let us forget. Dr. Bob, I'm sure, would have preferred to be here in person, but please keep him in your comforting thoughts as he honors the memory of his mother, who passed away just a few days ago. At Children at Risk, we fully embrace the 7,475,000 children who live in Texas, no matter the details of their journey to our state. 1 in every 3 children in Texas is an immigrant. They're Texans now, new Americans. 109,090 are active DACA recipients. 133,000 are undocumented. At any given time, there are 1 million students of English as a second language in our classrooms. In the midst of their growth and development, these new American children face a plethora of unique challenges, including anxiety and stress surrounding their immigration status or that of a family member. New American children are also more likely to experience culture shock or lack access to high-quality public education. Texas teachers have reported feeling helpless as they watch students struggle with the anxiety and fear from increased immigration enforcement and feeling unable to provide the emotional support and guidance that their students need. Children at Risk launched the Center for New American Children in January of 2018 to help Texas schools respond to these challenges. Now led by Linda Lorelle, who you'll meet later, our research and advocacy in this area includes our annual Immigration Summit, which explores child-centered policies that shift the narrative around impacted families, and our newly released State of Inequity report that provides a snapshot of inequities in education, health, and fair justice, and proposes legislative solutions. Key points revolving immigration in the State of Inequities report include the following. Immigrant communities face specific barriers to receiving critical information regarding pregnancies, including lack of access to affordable medical care, language barriers, misinformation, and medical mistrust. In Texas, that means 5 million people, 17% of the population, are at risk of not getting potentially life-saving information. Additionally, many immigrant children and families don't have access to care they are otherwise eligible for because of their legal status. Over 850,000 children in Texas have undocumented parents, and about 1.2 million children have a parent that is a legal permanent resident. Current federal law requires citizenship or 5 years of permanent residency for Medicaid eligibility. Basic needs, including sleep, are of concern. Family separation due to deportations and immigration detention is traumatic for immigrant families in Texas. These fears create serious health consequences like anxiety, PTSD, and depression, all factors that seriously disrupt a child's sleep routine. Equitable access to a good education is also an inequity that must be explored. Barriers to reaching critical educational milestones are exacerbated for immigrant children whose mixed status households are threatened by the constant fear of deportation. It is imperative that these advancements be made in equity. Intervention must begin early and must include provisions to ensure that not only do students have access to high-quality schooling, but that these spaces are safe from immigration enforcement in accordance with federal immigration policies. Additionally, providing bilingual early childhood education training for prospective providers and investing in quality early childhood education, immigrant workers can empower our immigrant children through cultural and dual language support. Systemic racism, including outdated immigration policies, impacts housing, employment, community poverty, and other aspects of life that affect a child's ability to receive subsidies. As we listen and learn tonight, let's not fail to think of every child as our own and pull out all the stops to love and protect each one of them. Our children, Texas children, new American children. We like to say that everything's bigger in Texas. Let's ensure our hearts for all children in Texas are also the biggest. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon. You heard Tony talk about Stan Merrick a little while ago, and in just a moment, Stan will join our panel discussion. I bring him up now because Stan is the driving force behind the film that you're about to see. It was produced by a creative team called The Rational Middle. Stan is famous for saying, you know, you've got the extreme 10% on the left and the 10% on the right, and then there's the 80% in the middle, which is the majority of us. So we ought to be able to come together and figure it out. And so one of the things that Stan has done over these 20 plus years that he's been working on this issue is find a creative team that can help tell the story. So the Rational Middle has produced many videos about immigration that Stan has funded and been behind and is pushing forward. You're going to see one of these films right now. You can see all of them at rationalmiddle.com. But right now, please take a moment to watch this film about children of immigrants, The American Promise, and then we'll have our conversation.
The issue of immigration is unique in that it is a history of how the country came to be in its present form, whether it's the arrival of the first Europeans, whether it's the involuntary transfer of African slaves, whether it's the great exodus from Asia and Europe. So it's our history. It is also destiny. The story of the future of our country is the story of connecting with and easing the transition of the children of new Americans that will be the fundamental players in the remaking of our economy, of our society, the promise in our country.
I think people don't know enough about immigrant children. What they do know has been defined sort of in broad strokes. Kids coming across the border. We've heard about children in cages. To most people, that's immigrant children. The reality is that all around us, in our schools, everywhere, there are children of immigrants and immigrant children. These are kids that are going to grow up. They're going to be participants in our democracy. They're going to be participants in our economy. And what that means is that as we grow as a country, we're very dependent upon these kids.
Approximately a little over 1 million young people are undocumented. However, many more kids, about 4.5 million, are what we call mixed status kids. So they're kids who are born in the U.S., are American citizens, because all children born in the U.S. are citizens, but they have members of their family who are undocumented.
The U.S. citizen children in those mixed status families that have unauthorized immigrant parents have the same rights as any U.S. citizen child. Full access to health care, public schooling, and everything else.
But because their parents are not citizens, parents are often not taking advantage of the benefits because they know that there are down the line implications for potentially being deported by exposing themselves, as well as if they are standing in line to try to become citizens, it's often held against them.
The vast majority of children who in many ways live in the shadow of the law and in the shadow of the institutions of society, do so because they, through no fault of their own, are growing up in a context where the lack of papers their parents have has an enormous echo in their lives, in their opportunities, in the way these children and youth are endeavoring to become members of the American family.
Children are growing up and their upbringing is based in a lot of lack of trust, insecurity, feeling like they're not part of a system, right? So while you go to school and your friend has a mom or a dad that comes to school, participates volunteering, goes to parent-teacher conferences, your parent might be afraid of doing that. So you go to school and you do your best, but then your parent might be afraid to actually show up. And there's a lot of research that shows that the parent support has a huge impact on the academic success on a child. And added to this, let's talk about the support system. While most children go to school and come back to a mom that will read to them at night or to a dad that's going to help with homework, most of these children are the first individual in their family whose English is a first language. And also most of these parents might not even have a middle school education, so their support system is pretty restricted. In many or most of the cases, these kids actually have to grow up pretty quickly and become the adult in the family. So families can't wait for them to be at an age appropriate to drive the mom or drive the dad. They are the ones that if they get stopped, they're going to be the ones talking to the police. Or if they need something from school, they're the ones that are going to speak up. So again, many of these children have to grow up pretty quickly, again, in a dynamic based on the lack of trust and fear.
What that means for that child, though, is that you're still living, in a sense, in the shadows. You could be an American citizen, but you're still worried and sort of beware of the government and anyone asking you questions about your parents. The parents are worried constantly about being deported. That means the children are worried constantly about the fact that they may get home from school and their parents may not be there, or at some point in their childhood, their parent may be taken away. You know, we've heard the story of the child who came to school with a suitcase, and they're like, "Why did you bring a suitcase to school?" And the child responds, "Well, my parents make me pack the suitcase just in case they're not home when I get back from school." The most important thing to a child, right, is your parent. And to live with this idea that your parent could be snatched away from you, it is horrible. And for these kids, these American citizen kids, they have this trauma in their life that they bring to school with them, that they grow up with.
So that is, from the developmental point of view, it's a catastrophe. It sets a dynamic of constant fear. We know that stress is really bad for children, and the notion that your parent or your loved one could be taken away at any moment is just plain traumatic. And we know that trauma is not conducive for optimal well-being, should we say, or flourishing of children.
As someone who's been working at the intersection of immigration and child well-being issues for a very long time, I can tell you that immigration enforcement is nothing new. We have seen immigration enforcement under previous administrations. We've seen children separated from their parents as a result of detention or deportation in previous years. But previously, family separation has been seen as this unfortunate unintended consequence, and harm to children has been seen as an unintended consequence. And often when there's been public outcry, there have been also policies put in place to help mitigate the harm to children caused by things like immigration enforcement. Unfortunately, in recent years and under this administration, we've seen that harm to children, whether it's ripping a baby away from a mother at the border or instituting the largest worksite raid in our nation's history on the first day of school in Mississippi, or denying children access to basic health care and nutrition assistance. All of these policy decisions are often done with the intention to harm children, and they're often seen as a strategy for deterring future migration. So the level of fear that I have seen around the country among children at all ages, and the amount of strain that this has put on early childhood providers and schools is like nothing I have ever seen.
Major studies are describing the nexus between these concerns over immigration, family separations, and the invasion of incivility. Too many cases of hatred into classrooms, bullying, aggression, against children who are perceived as children of outsiders, the children of immigrants, the children of the other. The lack of papers, the lack of stability, the lack of certainty for the future becomes defining in the lives of the kids.
I think it's important to remember that the American public recognizes that all children in the U.S. deserve the opportunity to achieve their full potential, and that it's in our best interest as a country to ensure that all children have access to health care, that all children have access to an education, and that they're able to become healthy and productive adults. And the fact is that children in immigrant families, the vast majority of whom are US-born citizens, are going to make up a significant portion of our future workforce. It's a very difficult decision to choose to leave one's country. We all know how hard it is to just move from one neighborhood to another, from one state to another, especially when you have children. Some are actually escaping real dangers, whether it's violence or persecution or debilitating poverty or natural disasters. Some people are coming here in the search of a better life for themselves or for their children, or to reunify with family members. The fact is that people migrate. It's part of our human history. It's a big part of our US history, and one that has made us a better and stronger country. And parents are just doing the best they can to provide their child with a better life. And the vast majority of Americans believe that it's important to keep families together. Even some of the people who have some of the most conservative views on immigration don't believe that it's a good use of resources to detain or deport a hardworking father and take him away from his family when he poses no risk to our safety and whose only issue is that he doesn't have the proper documentation to work here.
We are making a child-focused issue a political issue. And this conversation has to be based on our children, their well-being, and the present and the future of our community. This is who we are. We are a mix of cultures, of diversity that makes us richer, that makes us better. Look at our workforce. Look at our gardeners, our teachers, our janitors, our physicians, lawyers. We have immigrants all over the place that again enrich our workforce and our culture on a daily basis.
I think in the end, it's all about how do we take care of all of our kids. For these children who really represent so much for us, I think we have to step back and say, are we doing everything possible to make sure that our future is secure and that these kids are doing okay? The answer is no, that we're not doing the best for them in school, we're not doing the best for them health-wise, and certainly mental health. This is something that would hold back any child, and is certainly holding back these kids.
If we bring up all of our children together, sharing our common values, prosperity, hard work, democracy, if children in immigrant families integrate fully, and there's no reason why they can't, then these other differences won't matter. I think there's been way too much emphasis on the cultural and ethnic differences of immigrants, given that almost all of us are children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren of immigrants anyway. And what we need to explore is commonality.
So from the human point of view, it is absolutely dire that we not suck the oxygen out of the possibility of their flourishing. And from the economic point of view, it's a catastrophe if 26% of our kids are not flourishing. So from the purely human, individual human point of view, from the humanitarian point of view, from the economic point of view, we must figure out a way to solve this situation.
I think our country is at a critical crossroads right now. We know that the harm that's been done is going to take a long time to heal. We need these children to heal. We need them to do well. They deserve to do well, and we as a country can make that possible by stopping what's happening now and also implementing policies that can help put these kids back on a path to success. Without their success, we're going to be in serious trouble because not only are the costs of dealing with the poor health outcomes, the poor mental health outcomes, the increased poverty that these children are likely to fall into with their families torn apart. That is going to be a much greater cost to us in the future than if we actually invest in these kids and just provide them the basic protections and the ability to do well and stay with their families. If we do that, we're actually looking at a much brighter future for our country.
So obviously that gave us a lot of fodder for discussion, and now it's time for us to get to it. Linda Corchado is the director of the Children's Immigration Network for Children at Risk. She has worked in many capacities in immigration advocacy, working across the aisle with law enforcement and government officials. As an attorney from El Paso, she has been at the forefront of key legal battles on the border, ranging from the separation of families under zero tolerance to advocating for the end of expulsions of unaccompanied minors and reforming our immigration court. Ms. Corchado's work has been featured in The New Yorker, The Los Angeles Times, and El Paso Matters. Please welcome Linda Corchado to the stage. You've heard his name multiple times already. Stan Marek is president and CEO of the Marek family of companies, one of the largest interior contractors in the Southwest. Stan's family immigrated from Czechoslovakia and survived homelessness after their arrival here in America. His family history and his role as an employer in the construction industry are the driving forces behind Stan's passion and advocacy for meaningful immigration reform. Dreamers are among his employees. He's been in the trenches on this issue for more than 20 years now and recently stepped up his efforts to help move the needle forward. And that includes gatherings like this one to foster education and thoughtful discussion with a focus on solutions, as well as funding a series of high-impact films on immigration, including the one that we just saw. Please welcome Stan Marek to the stage. And Tony Payan, certainly no stranger to this group, is the Françoise and Edward Dirigian Fellow for Mexico Studies and Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Payan's research focuses primarily on border studies, particularly the U.S.-Mexico border. He also researches problems affecting the U.S.-Mexico relationship. One of the two books that Payan has authored is entitled The Three U.S.-Mexico Border Wars: Drugs, Immigration, and Homeland Security. He's a member of the Greater Houston Partnership's Immigration Task Force and the Mexico Energy Task Force. Please welcome Tony to the stage. He's taking the shortcut. Like you know the place, right?
If you want to say something.
Oh, I will. Okay, thank you. So we just saw a very impactful film that gave us a lot to think and talk about. And my first question for the panelists is, based upon everything that we just saw in the film and all of the different points that were made, as you think about the points that were made from your perspective and your role in the immigration space, pick a point that you think really needs to be amplified at this time, that people need to hear, understand, perhaps have a myth about, don't really understand?
Well, I think the reality, when you see that video, it really clicks that immigrant children living in Texas are living a half-life. And at Children at Risk, we care about access to education, access to medical care, access to opportunity. That's the commonality amongst all children, and we care about all children. But the real task at hand is, how do we depoliticize the lives of immigrant children? And that's why I'm excited to be here with all of you as we tackle that issue, because that is the current that makes that access so much harder for immigrant children.
The depoliticization of the topic, and Stan, I know that's where you live and breathe, is it's not about the politics, it's about the children. Amplify in any of the points that were made in the film that you want the audience to take away.
Well, I think that it's important that we all understand the state of play, especially in the state of Texas. California has more undocumented than we do, maybe, who knows? But we have at least 2.5 million undocumented in Texas. The estimates are over 750,000 in Houston metropolitan area. And I always like to put this in the context of NRG Stadium, which holds 50,000 people. Fill that thing, 15 times, and that's how many undocumented we have in our community. And many of those are kids, and those kids are our future workforce. And if we don't take care of those kids, give them the skills that they need, and the motivation and the pride of being an American, we've lost a generation. Dr. Kleinberg, who I'm happy to see is here tonight, in his book, Prophetic City, said it so well. You know, in the past, immigrants like my family, when they came here, they recognized the American dream. The kids of today, they're not gonna have the same opportunity. They're gonna face poverty. They're gonna face challenges that none of us want them to chase. So we need to think about Texas and Houston. And it's much bigger than this video. But this video, it's really important because it's all about the kids. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's very important.
Tony, what stood out to you from your perspective, especially the work that you're doing on the border? What would you like to share?
One of the, I guess is one of the things that the video didn't cover, but I thought it was a really important point. We have a colleague, Tran Dang, who works at the Rhizome Center in Guadalajara, Mexico, and she and I worked on a particular study and then later wrote an op-ed which was published in the Dallas Morning News on deportations by proxy. When you look at those kids, if you look at the video, for example, and you see the father, the mother being handcuffed and carried away and deported, sometimes the family has to make a choice. And the research that we did began with the story of Israel, a kid that is 17 years old, landing at the airport in Houston. His parents, he was born in Washington State because his parents were working in the fields, I guess, in eastern Washington State, where there's a lot of agricultural workers. And Israel landed in Houston with a US passport. He was deported with his parents, who had to make the tough choice on what to do. Once the father was deported to Mexico, they had to decide, do we all go? Does the mother stay with the U.S. citizen kids in Texas, or what's specifically going to happen to the family? I think they took Israel when he was a 1-year-old to Mexico, some rural area, and then now he has a U.S. passport. He's 17, he's 18, landing in Houston, and all of a sudden he is he doesn't speak English. He doesn't have the social and the cultural skills to integrate. So his profile is that of an undocumented worker because he doesn't quite fit into the society, but he has the documents. So it's almost the opposite. And I think we can see that, and in our study we found out that there's at least registered by the Mexican government 550,000 U.S. citizen children now living in Mexico with their deported parents. They have the right of return. They are U.S. citizens. They will grow up and they will come back.
But their parents can't come with them.
Of course.
Right.
And of course, we don't even know how many there are in Mexico because many of them settle on the border because then the kids can cross every day, attend U.S. school on the other side, but still live with their parents. It's our policy that's creating these situations. And I just want to finish, I just want to emphasize it's bad policy, and bad policy creates what we may dismiss as unintended consequences or collateral damage. No, I think we need to redimension that and think, no, these are human lives. These are kids, these are children, these are people who suffer and cry, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
And as I said at the beginning, that one of the things that we're trying to do here today is to put a human face on this so that we all understand all of the ramifications and the repercussions. I want to talk now about DACA because it's certainly at the forefront of this conversation. Stan, you employ 6 Dreamers, I believe. You're very passionate about DACA. So let's first of all, let's tell people kind of where things stand right now, because we're at a very critical point in whether DACA is going to go away forever which would be disastrous on multiple levels. Or if there's a way, there's a new act that has been proposed, the DREAM Act of 2023, bipartisan legislation that's been proposed by Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois and Senator Lindsey Graham. We don't know where that's going to go. It's the latest in the string of things that have tried to resurrect it. So Stan, tell the audience what you want them to know and understand about DACA.
Yes, I think it's critical that we all understand what DACA is, Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals. It was an executive order that President Obama had the opportunity to do, and basically, very simply, if you were brought here before you were age 16 by your parents, then you qualified for this executive order, which means you would basically come in to the Homeland Security, you would have a background check, you'd be fingerprinted, and you'd be given a work permit. And it had to be renewed every 2 years, cost $300 or $400. Are any of my dreamers here, Jose or Christina? Did y'all happen to, there's Jose. Jose, why don't you stand up, please? Jose is from Honduras. You were what, 3 when you were brought here? 8. And he went to KIP, outstanding man at KIP, University of Houston, construction science. And thank God for DACA, or you would be working in a restaurant or manual labor, but he's a project manager on the new Cypress Methodist Hospital at 290. Has a crew of about, 100 men under you? Yeah, 8 years. It's amazing what this young man has accomplished because of DACA. Now, DACA was closed during the Trump administration. In other words, you could not enter the program. There were approximately 700,000 young men and women, just like Jose, who went through the process, keep their status renewed every 2 years and are working. 700,000. There are an estimated 1,700,000 eligible for the program that can't get in because it was closed under the Trump administration. And Congress refuses to deal with it. It's a political tool. Now think about that. How many nurses do we need right now? How many school teachers do we need? How many policemen do we need? I've gone to my elected officials and say, Senator, look, why don't you say that if any potential dreamer will get a nursing degree, you'll give them a green card. I mean, think about it. They'd line up 1,700,000. The estimates are 150,000 just in Houston. I mean, think how many undocumented kids we have here. But who knows? Because we've never taken the time to ID them and to figure out who they are. So this is critical that at least the low-hanging fruit for our elected officials is DACA. It's such a simple thing to do. We have 700,000 that have done it. Just open the program. They're staying in line. Walk in.
And as you talk about, the workforce needs that are, at a point where every industry across the country, certainly in our state, but literally across the country, there is a workforce shortage. And this would be one way of helping to fulfill that while also dealing with this humanitarian broken system, this immigration system. So I want to ask Linda, what do you think the chances are? I mean, of actually having something happen along these lines that Stan's talking about, and we'll talk about the idea of ID and tax and that as a potential solution. But what are you seeing in the work that you've done in El Paso, and I know through your work as an attorney on the border? Tell us what you're seeing in the landscape and what you think we can potentially expect.
I mean, I know it sounds naive, but I think it is possible still, because I've looked at this from the humanitarian aspect, right? Looking at the separation of families. It was incredible that Americans drew a line, and it was a moral line. And for someone like myself, that's a really tall ask for Americans during this time. And they drew it, and they said, this is not a country that separates a 3-year-old from their mother. This just isn't. Figure it out, government, and they did. And so still, even now, I'm reaping the awards of that mobilization from the American public. I've represented mothers who were deported without their children, who were able to reunify, come back to the family, And those ripple effects are still trickling down to grandma, for example.
Give us an example of what you mean by that.
I'm representing one person. I'm still, these are some of the last cases before I came on.
Yeah, you just started with children
right,
at risk.
so I'm still straddling a little bit. She was separated from her kid, Skeldi, in 2017. It was a pilot program. And she was detained by ICE. The kids went to Philadelphia to live with their sister, and so the Trump administration said, well, that's reunification. The kids are with family. We can deport mom. And that's what happened. So I represented her for 4 or 5 years as she took on her case before an immigration judge who has a very high denial rate of asylum in El Paso. She was deported. We represented her when she was in southern Mexico, homeless up into Ciudad Juarez, which is a very violent city. And always she had her dream of being back with her children. And so she was the first mother to be reunified under the Biden administration, under his policies. But what's so powerful is that they decided, this reunification task force, that we care about the whole family. So when grandma found out that my daughter is detained and my grandkids are now almost homeless in Philadelphia, at 78 years old, she took the trek alone to cross the border and be with those kids. And so now this is a government that says, and we don't want those kids to suffer anymore either. We want grandma to also stay. May they never suffer the trauma of another deportation, another separation.
So let's talk about some potential solutions to this.
Right.
So as you know, I think it was in just earlier this month, the Biden administration announced the new proposal where they are, I'm gonna look at my notes now, basically taking the parole process for Venezuelans that was successful, and then they've expanded it to Nicaraguans, Haitians, Cubans. Tell the audience a little bit about how that's working, and what you think from your perspective, as an attorney, we can expect from that program.
You know, what I think is interesting is in December, 84,000 persons were presenting at the bridge or were trying to enter the United States. After they named this policy, it was 11,909 persons. So that means that when migrants know of legal pathways, they will take that opportunity. And I think it's great. I think it's a pathway that relieves the stress at the bridges. CBP, our law enforcement, I completely back them. They say, we are not social workers. We don't want to be a part of this. And we agree. If there's a legal pathway, there's a way forward. They should take that. So, this is another great example for the Biden administration, for government officials to see when we create legal pathways, this eases the stress across the board. When we think about DACA ending, I also think about the strain that'll have on our immigration court system that's already debilitated. The strain on law enforcement.
Well, and part of the proposal, as I understand it, is that they will increase the number of asylum judges, court judges, judges in the courts, and then the asylum workers, so that the whole process is able to be expedited a bit more than it is currently.
Right. Yep. That's something that I joined advocates in these last 2 years to try and advocate for, and we saw success there. We were pushing the administration, DHS, to see that when asylum seekers present themselves at the bridge, who should be deciding those cases? Immigration judges or trained asylum officers who know how to deal with trauma, et cetera. So the Biden administration took that pathway, and now by adding asylum officers to the mix to decide asylum cases, they work hand in hand with the immigration judges to relieve the stress. So all good things on my end when I see those sorts of desires.
So Tony, you've been living in this with this topic for so much of your career, and you've spent a lot of time on the border. What is your take on this new proposal and whether it's going to work? Is it enough? Is it a good start? Where do you come down on it?
I mean, I think it's a good step. I think the Biden administration, as the Obama administration, were considerably more sympathetic, and they try to do as much. On my desk upstairs, I have a book on immigration law and the presidency, not the president, but the presidency. What does that mean? It means that presidents are having to deal with a serious public policy issue in the complete absence of Congress. Congress is simply refusing to act. They don't want to legislate. They don't want to add resources. And so presidents have to step in. And then, of course, Congress often complains about the fact that the president has expanded powers and encroaches upon legislative powers of Congress. For example, on DACA, there was a big argument about whether the president had the power to do something like DACA and so on. The presidents find ways to deal with it. But I still think it's not enough. For example, I think we have 465 immigration judges, something like that. And we have now, just the latest numbers, because I track the numbers, over 2 million cases waiting to be heard by an immigration judge. Even if you think that these immigration judges work 40 hours a week, some of them are obviously on vacation, some of them are sick, some of them are on leave, you name it. How many effective hours do you have of 465 people for 2.2 million people waiting in the docket? It's just, and the president is obviously doing what he can. Presidents have done that. Obviously, the Trump administration chose to go in a different direction. DACA was hanging by a thread. The only reason why the Supreme Court, I think, upheld it almost indirectly is because the Trump administration did not follow the right procedures, administrative procedures, to cancel it. Otherwise, it would have been gone. And then you had the opposite in the DACA recipients of what I mentioned in Israel, right? Somebody who grew up outside, but it's a U.S. citizen, and the DACA are practically U.S. citizens for all practical purposes. They're integrated, they're bilingual or speak English quite well. They're highly educated. They're more educated than the general population, but they don't have the documents. And so our policy, I think, creates these issues, and the president deals with it as best as he can.
So, if you had the power to do something, you said this is a good first step and it's not enough. If you had the power to wave a magic wand and say, this is what we need to do, give me 2 or 3 things that we need to do. And then I'm going to go to Stan, because Stan has an idea, and we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Well, I think if I were the president, I would probably test the system, both the judicial system as well as the congressional powers, and say, okay, DACA is now going to be extended to DAPA. Remember that DAPA? There was a Parents of Americans, because we want to avoid the trauma of deportation, and that's a serious human problem. There are many different arguments that you can take about the undocumented population in the United States, some 10.7 million, 11 million, who knows, as Stan said, how many we got, we don't even know. We estimate that there's about 11 million of them. But I would say, look, the president has these particular powers. These individuals are not subject to deportation, and let Congress and the courts act and see what happens. So I would push the horizon, the limits of the presidential powers, and push beyond DACA into DAPA and see what happens.
Okay, Stan, so you have come up with the idea, you've been talking a lot over the last few years about the concept of ID and tax. There's actually a film about this that you can find at rationalmiddle.com. Explain briefly to our audience what the concept is, how it would work, and why you think it would work.
Well, think about the 11 to 20 million people who are here. You know, they're all working. They're cutting your lawns, they're taking care of your kids, they're cooking, they're building your buildings. We're not going to deport them. There's no way. We could, first of all, round them all up. It would cost billions. And if we did, it would destroy our economy. With our zero birth rate, if we don't have immigration, you can forget the good times. They're over. Our GDP is not going to grow without immigration. So why don't we just say, okay, you've been here 5 years. You come in, Homeland Security, if you can pass a background check, which 98% of them can, get fingerprinted, and you go to work for an employer and pay taxes like the rest of us. And it let people like me who need workers desperately, I mean, they're all out there working. I mean, you go on a Tesla job site, you'd probably see more undocumented there than you would at the border. They're there. Remember, in the United States, you do not need an ID to go to work. Think about it. You can go anywhere, any moment, and go to work. Nobody's going to ask, are you legal? And they should. And there are companies that do that. If you do federal work, you have to ask those questions. But the majority of the job sites, the majority of the jobs, the restaurants, the landscaping, farm workers, they're pushing our economy. They are not ID'd. And nobody wants to mess with a national ID. And the Social Security card, the last major immigration law was Immigration Reform Act of '86, and that was an I-9, which was a Social Security card and an ID. You can't control things like that. Today we have biometrics. If we were to open the door for these undocumented people to go to work for employers like me who pay and match taxes, we could easily ID all those people with biometric IDs, and we know who they are, and they would get better wages, they'd get better training, they'd be safer, and it would just work for everybody. And if you watch that episode 12, which is right after this one, Rational Middle, we have the program. And everybody says, that's just common sense. Well, why don't we do it? Why don't our elected officials do it?
So tell them why, why they won't do it. So let me just say this. So Stan, and you can chime in here. So Stan, as I said, Stan has been working on this issue for over 20 years. He has he's an avowed Republican, right, Stan?
Right.
Okay. He has donated money to candidates on both sides of the aisle. All he cares about is getting this fixed. And he'll donate to somebody if they say they can fix it, and then he donates the money and it doesn't get fixed. And so he's done this on both sides of the aisle. He has talked with Senator Cornyn. He has talked with Senator Cruz. He has talked with, so what's the holdup?
Well, it's so convenient to be a political issue that they can use in their elections. In other words, in the state of Texas, because of our primary system, 7% of people vote. If you're a Republican running in a primary, you got to be to the right of the other guy. So it's deport everybody. And that just, so the 10% on the right and the 10% on the left, as Linda said, they're controlling the debate for us 80% in the middle. And some way, somehow, somebody in Congress has got to wake up and say, look, we can compromise. We can talk about these issues for the American people, and we can come up with a bill that works. It's just not that hard. In 2013, there was a bill in the Senate, 64 senators voted for it, and it never even got to the House for a vote because a lot of reasons. Boehner will tell you but the real reasons were they didn't want it to pass. The far right did not want that to pass. And it's been a tremendous advantage for the Republicans in the past elections to immigration. You're being invaded. We've got hordes of people just waiting to get in. They're all rapists, they're murderers. Let's get them out of here. And the far right buys that, and it pushes elections. And it's going to be interesting in 24 if we don't solve this, because the Democrats are going to have the abortion issue, right to life, and the Republicans are going to have immigration, and you talk about a mess. These primaries are not going to be fun for anybody. So let's solve it now. I mean, there is a deal out there to be made for border security and for DACA and for ID and tax for those who will come out of the shadows, give the government their information, and go to work and pay taxes. People want to do that. People want a driver's license. People want to quit worrying about, am I going to be deported today? Mm-hmm. I want to get insurance when I get my, it's so broken and it's so simple to fix. And I think it's the voice of the American people that our politicians aren't hearing.
And that's a big part of the reason that we're here is that, Stan and I did another one of these town halls yesterday with the Houston West Chamber of Commerce. And the idea is to have conversations like this, educate people, talk openly, honestly, get feedback, and I'm going to be out in the audience in just a minute. And then the goal here is to have you then go contact your legislators and say, look, we think that this is a good idea and you need to pay attention to it and you need to fix it, because if we don't push them to do it, it's just going to continue kicking the can down the road. Only right now we're at a really, really critical inflection point. And Dr. Kleinberg, I'm going to come to you in a minute and ask you about that. But first, I'm going to have Tony weigh in, because I could see you wanted to amplify or put a fine point on what Stan
The
just
reason
said.
why I think the ID and tax is a viable solution is because it's the middle. I mean, if you think about full legalization with a path to citizenship, the Republicans are scared of that because they think that immigrants are going to vote Democrat and they don't want to pursue that particular path. They think we're not going to risk 10 million new votes plus their families and such. And the left, I think, is a little bit scared because they say that what we're doing is we're going to create a 3-tier society in which some of us are citizens and can work, and some are U.S. permanent residents with certain rights, not all of them. They can't vote, for example, in LPR. A legal permanent resident can't vote, so they have certain rights, but not all of them. And then you create this class that has very limited rights, right? The ID and tax. But we have 2 models of ID and tax that work very well and very successfully. One is called TPS, Temporary Protected Status. That is not a permanent residence in the United States. It's renewable every 2 or 3 years, whatever it is. And what do they get? They get an ID, they can work, and they get taxed. And they can buy properties and they can do a number of things. TPS is, for all practical purposes, an ID and tax. And I don't see the left trying to knock it down. And the other one is, of course, DACA, which is a kind of ID and tax. They're not legal permanent residents. They're not on a path to citizenship, but they are getting ID'd and they're getting taxed and they work and they can study and they can produce for society. So we have 2 visa paths, TPS and DACA, that have shown the way. This can be applied to another 10 million, 12 million, however many there are, and I think it can be done very successfully. The only thing is that I think there's a low political will in Congress.
Which is why we have to push them.
Yeah, one other quick thing is,
Yes.
you know, some of you like me are on Social Security, and I like that Social Security. You take 1 million people, 1 million undocumented people in the shadows and put them on a W-2 payroll, like all of us. That generates $1.475 billion per year towards Social Security. Now think about that. Multiply that times 10, that's $40 billion, $14 billion a year. So if we can do that, it will keep our Social Security Administration in cash, rather than our politicians talking about we've got to end it because it costs too much. That's not an option as far as I'm concerned. These men and women, all of us who worked our entire lives paying Social Security, to have a threat that we might not get it when we retire, that's un-American. So here's a solution right there that tax the 11 million people who are here.
Well, I just want to stress the importance of now, because I've seen, you know, amazing progress that happens when persons coalesce in a time of crisis. And this doesn't feel like a crisis for a lot of Americans, but I see a lot of potential. And so, you know, when I talk about protecting grandma too, the persons who did that were all of you. You all coalesced and held that moral ground. And so I think to myself, the business community in Texas is the silent giant. And so if you all can get behind this too, I do think there's good progress that could be made.
Awesome. Okay, as you can see, I'm out roaming about right now. I want to get Jose. Could you stand up for me, please? This is the young man that Stan was just talking to a moment ago. How are you?
I'm good.
It's good to see you. So the reason that I want to talk to you right now is because you have been at some of these town halls that we've done before, and I have asked you this question. So one of the questions that comes up when we talk about ID and tax is, would people really come out of the shadows, right? Would they come out of the shadows? What you said the last time I asked you this question, you said yes, they would. What do you think about this, and why do you think it would work?
I mean, look at me, right? I was given an opportunity and I took it. And just think about all those people that are undocumented, they're working, like Stan says, washing dishes. And imagine if you give that person an opportunity. Granted, not everybody wants to give that person an opportunity, but if they take it, they can do whatever they want. And ultimately, it's a humanitarian thing, right? We're all humans, and that's where it all matters. And all of you guys are here because you guys care. some way or another. So, granted, I think that's, yeah, I mean, a lot of people will take it just to better themselves.
Now, as a recipient of DACA, you have to renew every 2 years, right?
I laugh about this because, you know, I give this example. I know how to drive. I've been driving most of my life, right? And once my DACA expires, I no longer have a driver license. Does that make me incompetent to drive, right? And it's just a document that allows me to work and do whatever opportunities the U.S. gives me. I can't leave the country because if I leave the country, I can't come back. But yeah, I mean, sorry for the word, but it sucks.
So where are you in your DACA renewal process now, and what is it like to have all of this hanging over your head?
Well, I actually just renewed it. And going back to the whole license thing, I'm actually have to go renew it because otherwise if I get pulled over, I'll get a ticket for expired license. And yeah, the whole process, I just renewed it, so I have 2 more years to stay here. From there, I don't know. I may be here or I may not in 2 years.
Well, I know if Stan has anything to say about it, you'll still be here, right? Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, Steve Kleinberg, I'm coming over to you, and then I'm going to take questions, so get your questions ready. But I have to ask Dr. Kleinberg. First of all, it's good to see you. Stan mentioned your book, Prophetic City, and you, of course, talk in that book. And guys, if you haven't read it, for goodness sakes, you need to read it. It's really, really great. So talk about why we are at an inflection point when it comes to immigration and why it's so important that we solve this issue.
Well, I think it's obvious to all of us. This has been a wonderful discussion it's so clear how we can do this, and it's so important to regularize our workforce and to make sure that this, as we're in the process of this fundamental shift from the aging of Anglos, the average age of Anglos in Harris County is 47. The average age of Latinos is 24. And you got a real sense of this is a moment when this next generation is coming and strengthening the city and positioning Houston as a gateway to the global marketplace. And we're just not doing the kinds of things that are just so obviously necessary. And so I'm very grateful for the work here. And you got to believe that America is a place with some rationality here and some recognition that we can build. I think one of the real difficulties is that people don't want to reward people who've come here without the legal papers. And so there's a real reluctance to address these issues in effective ways. And we've got to find a way through that and say, this is the new America that we're building together in the 21st century, and it requires and needs the participation of everybody, especially this remarkable group of immigrants who've been cut off from opportunities.
Thank you. And not just for those comments, but for the last 40, 50 years of your work and all that you have done. We are going to miss you. Yes. Yes. Yeah. You're a treasure, and we're going to miss you, and we wish you the best. Just come back and visit, okay? Okay. All right. Okay. Who would like to chime in with a question or a comment? Do we have any of those yet? Come on now, make me walk, make me get my steps in. Yes.
I think it might be good just to say, like, what are the numbers? I think are just surprisingly low of the number of legal immigrants that can actually come into the U.S. each year. I mean, it's like 10, 12,000?
In January, yes.
Yeah, so it's just, I mean, I think that's a good reminder of just how little, that hasn't been changed since the 60s or something, am I
probably with the
correctly?
80s when...
96, I think, but more important than that, I think if you think about 2020, which was a difficult year anyway, in the Trump administration, through the visa paths down on Florida practically, that year the United States grew by 395,000 people in 2020. That's the lowest number the country has ever grown in its entire history. So we're not taking enough immigrants. And Stan made a reference to this, which was a very important thing. The fertility rate in the United States is currently at 1.7. You need 2.1 just for replacement to maintain the population level. Most of us are getting older. I'm certainly beginning to think about Social Security and things like that. And even though I got 15 years to go or whatever, 17 years to go, and I still think about that and I say, who's gonna be there to work all these 30, 35 years that I've been working? Those kinds of questions, and you just don't have the population, and we're not reproducing, and immigration is a solution, but clearly the number of visas and visa paths that we have in the system are just not enough. I'll give you one other instance, and I think the US government actually recognizes that at some level. Every year, the H-2A visas, which are agricultural visas, right? The U.S., I think, has about 180,000 every year. 180,000 Mexicans and other nationalities, but mostly Mexicans, come to the United States with an H-2A visa to work in the fields in California and Florida and different places. Last year alone, the administration had to increase that number to 252,000. We just don't have the agricultural workers, let alone the construction workers. We don't have the agricultural workers, and so the administration is having to lift the cap. That means that this economy, as vibrant as it is, needs a lot more workers, and the visa paths and the visa numbers are just not enough.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add to this that there is a book called Prosperity in the Age of Decline, where two economists did the math and projected the labor shortage, and that leads us to a full-scale depression by 2029 if we don't do something about the labor shortage. So currently our labor shortage is running about 5 million unfilled jobs. Prosperity in the Age of Decline.
Thank you.
And they did the math.
Okay. Was it you? Yes.
I grew up in Texas, and when I was young, until I'm quite old, people would come over from Mexico and work and go back, and nobody thought anything of it. I'm pretty sure all the stable hands at the stable where I rode were undocumented, but it was no big deal. Now, but of course, the population of Texas has increased tremendously since then. So is a lot of this anti-immigrant coming from people who've moved into Texas?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I think a lot of it is just the fact that so many people, well, first of all, 9/11 changed everything as far as back and forth across the border. Immigration Naturalization Service went away. Homeland Security became the 800-pound gorilla. And we needed that to secure our borders and airports, et cetera. But I think when you have so many people coming and there's no way for them to be legal, and word gets out that ICE is picking up people here, picking up people there, and then they stop, and then they start with every administration is different. I mean, Bush 2042 was different than Obama. Obama was different than Trump. Now Biden. So everything's different. But Texans, they really want everybody to look like themselves. If you're an Anglo, and many people feel that way. But we are a Latino state now. We're 42% Latino.
Well, again, prophetic city.
Yeah.
Okay. He talks about all of that in there.
Like Steve says, it's a done deal. It's not going to change, is it, Steve?
Yeah. No.
That's a good question.
It's done. It's a done deal.
May not be answers to some of these things.
That's not happening anymore. Yes, sir.
All of these solutions seem so obvious to anyone of reasonable intelligence, but I'm concerned about the politics. I'm wondering, Stan, when you're in that smoke-filled room with your whiskey and your Republican buddies, and you're talking to Ted Cruz, you say, Ted, you're an intelligent man. You went to he's a Princeton guy or where Harvard. You're intelligent. Does he say, Stan, I gotta tell you, this is as plain as the nose on your face, but I've got tens of millions of votes of racists and bigots, and my job is getting elected, and I can't get elected without catering to the racists.
No, I'm not.
So
I have never been with Cruz. Let me just say that. But I have spent.
let's just set the record straight.
I have spent a lot of time with Senator Cornyn, and he's a good man, and he'll tell you. Says, Stan, there's nothing more important than me being elected so I can represent you. And if I'm not on the right side of immigration, I'm not going to get elected, especially in the state of Texas. Now, things change, and our Latino population is getting more people voting. We may be a blue state one day, we may not. I mean, I still think most Latinos would be Republicans if given the opportunity. And it's all. You're right. It's all political. What's it going to take to win the vote?
I think there is I'll come back to the politics and Boehner in a minute, but I think there is a lot of anxiety about the nature of America. I remember when I was a graduate student at Georgetown back in the 1990s, reading some of the articles written, I think they were penned by Huntington, I think Samuel Huntington, about the clash of civilizations and all kinds of literature that was emerging in the 90s about the changing character of America and how in the browning of America, and there are all kinds of articles showing up at that time, and then of course they accelerated and they became more popular after September 11th. But in 2005 or so, I was invited to a conference over in Albuquerque, and I went there, and I think it was about Orishas, Guadalupe, and other kind of religions, and I don't know why I'm a political scientist, so I decided to write about immigration, and at that time, I began to sort of reflect systematically on that essay that I was writing for this particular conference about Latinos and Hispanics, right? And as I reflected on that, I realized, okay, so the traditional image, if you watch the Speedy Gonzales and the old cartoons on TV up in the mid 20th century, and then the typical Mexican sitting on the by a cactus, taking a nap with a big sombrero. I mean, if you look at Latinos and Hispanics, they're Christian, they're hardworking, they're Western, their values are the very values of this country. I mean and so I did a reflection. It's a chapter in a book. I just remember that when you were talking about that, and I went down the list of values and I did a table about and I realized they're just as hardworking. In fact, you couldn't find more hardworking people than these undocumented workers, because they work very hard. And then you see them in Houston sometimes in the streets when I drive late night, and you see these guys in the bikes because they don't drive any longer. It's almost some undocumented worker who probably just finished working in the kitchen of some restaurant but can't drive, doesn't have a car, and he moves in a bicycle around Houston. So you just watch and you'll see this kind of stuff. But I think the cynicism of our political class is really, really important. When Boehner stopped being the Speaker of the House, and he stopped that bill that passed in the Senate, that I think the Gang of Eight proposed that bill back in 2013, 2014. We were working on an immigration project here at the Baker Institute, and I remember talking to some of the senators about that particular bill. And they were very enthused. They got 64 votes. They got exactly what they needed in the Senate, above 60. And then it came to the House, and Boehner stopped it. He said no. And then when he was no longer Speaker of the House, then he said, I should have done it. It was the right thing to do. But
well, see, that's
he
the
said
thing.
The same thing about marijuana when marijuana, the bill.
That's the thing. They will say one thing, knowing that it's the right thing to do. They'll say that, after the fact.
Afterwards.
Or they'll say it in private among each other, but they won't say it out loud and actually help solve some of the issues.
Right.
This is my husband, and I think he has a question.
Well, the question I have, I've gone to a number of these events, and I've learned so much. I'm wondering why local TV isn't here covering it.
Well, that's a good question. I wasn't expecting that. I was not expecting that. Okay, we'll make sure they come here for the next one. Yes.
I'm going to add to what Lou said. So I had the same thought when I walked in this room. It's like we're talking to the people, like everybody in here knows this, right? Like, how do we get the people that need to learn this? And for me personally, so this has been a very emotional experience for me. I'm the daughter of an immigrant, and this discussion is evoking a lot of emotion. I'm glad I didn't ugly cry because my daddy's in heaven now. But what can we do? Like, we all know what we're talking about, right? And what can we do to somehow make it to the conversation with the people who need to know?
Well, let me take that if I could, please.
Yes.
You know, one thing after my 20 years of going to Washington, talking to senators, raising money, writing checks, I realized it doesn't do any good. Social media, rational middle. Share these with the world. We've had 5 million views of these. We ought to have 50 million views. They're free. Google Rational Middle Immigration, go on the website, 16 YouTube videos, one about every subject you need to know about, 150 podcasts. Steve's been on podcasts, several people, Tony, and share it with your friends and family and get the word out there, because we need to educate and empower voters on this immigration issue so they can contact their elected officials. And you know, and Senator Cornyn told me a long time ago, said, Stan, look, people call my office. They send emails, whatever. If it's for immigration, I put them over here. If it's against immigration, I put them over here. And at the end of the day, I look, well, which pile is highest? It's that simple. Well, then everybody's against immigration. I guess that's what I'll do, because that's what I need to do to get elected. But we need more people reaching out to our elected officials. It's simple. Just go on the website, call. They got interns there taking down information, and if you want to go visit with them, it's not the money. It's really business is controlling it. Businesses like the Kochs and all these big people that are giving hundreds of millions of dollars through PACs, they're listening to business. They're not listening to teachers. They're not listening to law enforcement. They're not listening to anybody but business, because that's where the big dollars are. And being a business person, I have a hard time getting fellow business people involved in an issue like immigration. You take the Fortune 500 companies, forget it. They're not going to touch immigration.
Well, that's because of the politicization of it, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to depoliticize it, right? Would you agree with me, Stan? Okay, we have another question here.
Yeah, a couple of comments. There is this notion that illegal immigrants don't pay taxes. Well, they're consuming everything we consume. Imagine that's gone. So we had to make that notice. I'm an immigrant from Uruguay. I came 22 years ago. And I'm not comparing myself with what an illegal person is facing, of course, but it took me 13 years to get a green card. I have degrees of all kinds and did a lot of things, and I was working professionally. Well, I have 2 kids, American kids, and for 6 years, I really had a tough time thinking that the next day I may have to go. And in fact, somebody mentioned maybe it's the culture. Well, many times, coming back from overseas, I had a person with a name called Gonzalez or Lopez, like myself, and they treat me like, for no reason. They were exactly like me. But the point is that there is a lot of people like myself that are already suffering because they might have to leave, and what do they do with their kids as well? So no, it's not the same situation, of course, but people like myself are the best supporter of what we could do here. So just wanted to emphasize.
Well, I don't know how many times I've apologized to people like you about our broken immigration system, and I apologize. America's better than that, and I do apologize.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Really appreciate that.
Thanks so much for this program and for getting those rational middle videos out, because they're very, very impactful. And following up on what we can do as individuals and as groups, I wanted to ask if you would tell us about the Texas Compact on Immigration, txcompact.org, which is businesses supporting immigration. Is that something we should work for in our state, or what else can we do other than contact our representatives?
Yeah, there are
what
several
other steps can we take?
Several well-organized organizations out there, and we can probably get that information, Linda, and share it on the Rational Middle website.
We are, and I'll tell you, I've got something else that we're gonna share too, so hang on one second. I'm trying to get as many questions in. Now all of a sudden everybody wants to talk. This is great.
Yes, I am Venezuelan, and my
it's not a question, it's a remark, because Stan, you said that we have to educate people, voters, about immigration. But Tony said that he had made a list of the values that the immigrants, especially the Latino immigrants, share with the Americans. So I think that we need someone from the education department here sitting with you just to tell us what are they doing in schools to avoid racism, classism, bigotry, and all the things that people in general here do to immigrants, because the problem is not that we share the same values, the problem is that we look different, and I think that's the point that we have to address.
You bring up an excellent point, and we could go very deep on that. I've got one more question back here, and then I'm going to come up over there. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Hi. So you touched earlier a little bit on humanitarian parole, and you mentioned that you welcome this measure and that when migrants are provided with a legal pathway, they take it, right? But I'm wondering, do you truly think this is a measure that's going to address the situation with migrants that don't have as many resources? Because humanitarian parole comes with a lot of requirements, right? Migrants need to have a passport, a valid passport, which is very hard for Venezuelans, for example. They need to have a connection in the US. They need to be able to pay for a flight to come to the US. So do you think that this measure is going to help address the situation with migrants who don't have resources?
I don't think it's the end-all be-all. And currently the border is closed because of Title 42. So what you're talking about and the ability to seek asylum, that still hasn't been restored at the border. So I think it's a solution, but it should never replace asylum. And persons who are being persecuted don't have the time to just fill out some forms and wait in line. Their lives are at stake. So it certainly shouldn't replace it. It's an option. And Biden is listening to partners on the ground who are seeing the reality.
Your question?
Hi, Linda. This is a question for you. As a practical matter, these children that we're talking about who are American citizens, but their parents are at risk of being deported or are being deported, does that put a strain on the foster care system that we have, or do they, just how does that work?
I think you have a companion comment about that.
We had a couple questions a couple people wanted that question asked and answered.
Yeah, certainly. I think, Tony's point is well received, and I've also represented persons who have to make that decision. Do we stay or do we go, and do we follow Dad? But there's also so much to say about the great sacrifice that's made by parents to just get here. When you see immigrants around you, they've paid a high price just to be with us. I was just talking to Maya about this the other day. So they're not going to let their kids just lose all of those benefits so quickly. So yes, it does become a situation where they're in the foster care pathway, and they have to resettle with other families, for example, but these families are now fragmented, and accessing all of those equitable issues that we care about just becomes so much harder because the family is now broken.
And then there's the mental health toll, too, that was touched upon very briefly in the film, but that in itself is just, my goodness. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I wanted to touch upon the family separation issue and maybe piggyback on, on the CPS and child welfare system. I'm on the Texas Human Trafficking Survivor Leader Council led by the Abbott's Office and United Nations Board. I'm a huge humanitarian person regarding children's welfare, particularly with immigration, and being in meetings the whole day today regarding immigration, domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault. I know this is a topic we haven't touched upon, but I think there's a huge intersection regarding that. My personal opinion is that children without their parents are at higher risk at these crimes. And do you think this policy would help reduce the victimization for these children?
Such an important question. Thank you very much. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I guess ID and tax. You're talking about if we gave legal status to the parents, it would definitely help the plight of the kids. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's why it's critical that if you know, you're an undocumented person, you have an American-born kid, you'll be one of the first in line to get a legal status. Now, it would be nice to give everybody a path to citizenship, right, but then you have the issue voters for the Republicans. They're not going to work with it. So we got to have something that people will come together in the middle. It's not going to be perfect. It never will be. But we have to do something. Just to sit around and do nothing.
You know, it's a common sense, at least first step to get something moving in a positive direction. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Davina, and Eileen, my girl, we actually just met a little while ago, but me and my paralegal here, we are with Lone Star Legal Aid. We work for the Justice for Human Trafficking Survivors program, and so my question, working with immigrants who are trafficking survivors whose status has been used against them specifically to be trafficked. So that's one thing, to piggyback off of what Eileen said, but I also wanted to ask, has anybody ever thought, and maybe this is lack of my knowledge, of using the visas that we do have where there are caps that are not met as a way to somewhat bring some of the undocumented folks in, so shifting those caps to elsewhere. Working with the trafficking visas, we have a cap of 5,000 that has never been reached since 2000 when it was first put into place. So then I'm always wondering, well, there's all these spaces that we have for the TVPA. Can that go somewhere, can that be, you know, pulled somewhere else, not just with that particular visa, but any other visas, H-1B, you know, the different working visas, as a temporary, you know, is that something that anybody's talked about, mentioned?
That really makes too much sense.
But I've actually heard a little bit about that, because here's the problem, right? Let's say that there is an adult from India and a family from India, and they have the father is an H-1B, or it's a professional on that particular work visa, and the wife is on H-4. And the kids are on H-4, and then the kid is growing up in the United States, he's approaching 18, right? And then when he turns 18, he can no longer hang on to the family visa based on the father's working status, not residency, the H-1B visa, and then all of a sudden the kid becomes overnight an undocumented resident, right? Because he's now an adult, 18, no longer dependent on the father's visa. That's happening quite a bit, because the United States gives out, I think, at its peak, it used to be about 400,000 H-1B visas per year. And so all of them would come in, H-1B, H-4 for the family, and then the kids would start growing up, become undocumented overnight on their birthday. And the idea was to use some of these additional visas and push them into those visas. It's not, I don't think it's that easy. I don't have the answer, but I've seen the problem, and I can tell you that without Congress authorizing almost explicitly the transfer of an H-4 to another type of visa is going to be very, very difficult. Some visas go unused because, for example, we have another problem, which is we assign the same number of visas for countries that don't make any sense. India may have access to a number of visas, and then Iceland has the access to the same number of visas. And so it's like India and Iceland, and the visas that could be assigned to Icelandic residents to come to the United States go unused, because that's a small country, nobody wants to come to the United States. And then there's a lot of Indians who want to come in. So there is this kind of gaps and then overfills and things like that. But without congressional action, I think that's going to be very, very difficult to
Which brings it back to us, to the groundswell of support. Wow, okay. My goodness, and we're at time, but if you want to keep going, can we stay a little longer? Sure. Are we good? Did you have a question? Somebody pointed me to you. But go, okay, all right, okay. Yes. Yes, okay.
Hi, basing off of all the things that we've been discussing just in the last few questions. So I am with the St. Jerome and Miliani Foster Care Program. So if anyone is interested on helping locally, you can help some of these youth. Our youth are refugees, so they are all considered legal, but a lot of them are asylees that have come from the border. A lot of them have been trafficked. They really need safe places to live. And there are many different ways you can help, even if you don't want to be a foster parent. We need volunteer tutors to help them with English, helping them, just with any subjects at school that they're struggling with. We're also having a career day next month, so if any immigrants here would like to come and talk about your success, that would be really inspirational for our kids. So please come find me. It's with Catholic Charities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making us aware of that. Yes, ma'am. Excuse me.
Thank you. So I am a refugee and was an asylum seeker. I know I don't sound like it or look like it. From Azerbaijan, which is a small little country. And interestingly enough, President Carter's policy were the policy that brought me here, and he just went on hospice, which is very sad for me. But I had an opportunity to meet him waiting for an elevator one day, and I thanked him for really my life, So if we're going to talk about changing the system, who are those politicians? Because the ones right now aren't working, right? And we all know how Jimmy Carter, how his presidency ended, okay? So where are these people? Because they're going, you should run for office, okay? Because the people...
Too old.
But the issue is that the people that are so brilliant, they don't want to become politicians. They're too smart. Right? And I'm not blanketing all politicians. I'm saying that the people that we used to have that were true leaders don't exist in politics anymore.
And you're right, and I don't think the system is going to change until we change our primary system. As long as people, in the state of Texas, 7% of the people voted in our primaries. Every primary candidate had to be to the extreme to get into the, here you have Attorney General Paxton, and you had Eva Guzman, who was a Texas Supreme Court Justice, running in the primary, the Republican primary, and she got beat in the primary by who somebody beat her, I can't remember. He wasn't going to win. She would have won in a general election. She's a brilliant lady, Latina. So we got to change our primary system, and whether our elected officials have the courage to do that, it's like term limitations. It'd be nice to have term limitations in Congress. We got a lot to work on, and I feel for our kids and my grandkids, Steve, because we're not doing a very good job being custodians. But I don't know what else we can do except mobilize people, social media, educate and empower people. I keep saying it over and over again, and you can't say it enough. Because people have to stand up and do what's right. And politicians, I would love to have run for the Senate, but I would have never got out of the primary. Because I would tell people what I really believe and what is right, not what people want to hear. So.
You have a question?
Yes, and a comment that I hear in the black community, working class, from many people, and it's not being brought up in audiences like this, that there are many black people who feel like those Mexicans are coming over here taking their jobs. They used to be the cooks and the cleaners and the people who'd cut the grass and all that. Now they feel like these people are coming over here taking our jobs that we've always had. And I find it very distressing, but at the same time, when they say, remember how we used to be the ones going to Miss Ann's house cleaning it, now they got all Mexican women. Remember how we used to be the one cutting the grass? Now they got the Mexicans doing that because they know they can pay them less money.
So that's a narrative that is out there, and the point that you're making is?
We don't talk about that particular narrative, that we've got to get on that too. That there are many. So
that gets to the humanity piece of how we treat each other. And then look also at so many of the issues that this country faces that goes back to the racism. It just does. Okay. And yes. No, I hear what you're saying.
Let me just comment on the wage issue, because I face this in construction every day. Wages are way too low for undocumented people, which impacts documented people, because we have to compete against low wages. And if we were to legalize everybody, the wages would go up, They pay and payroll taxes are different than ad valorem taxes and sales tax. Payroll taxes are a big thing for the working class. In other words, Social Security, Medicaid, all the good things that we need. So I think just by legalizing with an ID and tax bill to where we would raise wages for everybody, and I think it would make it more equal with our African American youth, with the Latino youth, with our Chinese youth, everybody. So I think it's critical we get those wages up.
Thank you, Stan. And your comment or question, sir?
So the prescriptions that have been talked about tonight basically address the issue of people who are here now in the country. I haven't heard anything about a kind of forward-thinking, then what? What do we do going forward? I assume that it would entail some quotas or some target number of immigrants that would be legal, a greater number probably than permitted today. That number is still unlikely to stop the surge of people that don't come in under that number. And so I'm just wondering, how do you all think about that issue going forward?
Well, I think that if we have to ID the people who are here first before we can deal with new, because we need to know who's here, we need to know what they are doing, and once we get everybody ID'd and taxed, working here, and then we also have requirements then that to come to work in the United States, you're going to have an ID. You're going to have something from the border that says you're eligible to work in the United States. And me as an employer, when you show up in my office and say, I want to go to work, I say, well, let me see your tamper-proof ID. And right now, we have cell phones that you can take a driver's license and get a hologram to know that that person it's a legal license. And we also have something called e-verification that employers subscribe to, so that we have a database. Everybody in the database has been background checked, fingerprint. So once people realize that you just can't come across the border and go to work, you got to have an ID and be legal, then we can sort of figure out, well, how many construction workers do we need? How many, every profession. I mean, we have the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which keep records nationally. We're smart enough as a nation to sort of anticipate what our needs are if we know who's here. But as long as we have 11 million people working off the books, no idea who they are, we have no idea what we need. It's just, you wake up in the morning, I need men. Where am I going to find them?
But I had actually thought about that issue, right? Because right now, what happens is Congress sets the number of visas per year, assigns a national quota to different countries, and there's different visa paths, and it's kind of a sclerotic system. It's too hard. It's not flexible enough. So what do? And I thought that maybe in the future, a bill, when our politicians actually have the vision to do that, maybe a future bill ought to be indexed to economic performance. And so that if you look at the data of economic performance, for example, the number of vacancies in the market, the types of vacancies and such, then you delegate the discretion to the bureaucracy to increase or decrease the number of visas that can be issued to workers based exactly on how the economy is performing. Somebody mentioned today, for example, that at some point there were, right after the pandemic and the Great Resignation and all kinds of things like that, there were about 11 million jobs available and only about 4 million workers looking for a job. So there were 6 to 7 million vacancies that just simply had no workers. If the bureaucracy had the discretion based on those kinds of statistics to actually say, we need these many workers, we need to increase the number of green cards and accelerate the process for those who are already waiting. For example, if you look at the Philippines or a few other countries, because their number of visas per year are capped, let's say India is assigned 50,000 or 70,000 or whatever, but there's 1 million people or 2 million people in India in line. Some of them actually wait 15, 20 years and then die in line waiting for the green card to come in. So the bureaucracy ought to be able to say, we need additional workers, and so India's cap ought to be lifted, or maybe we should relocate a number of unused visas from other countries to the Indian line so that more workers can come in. So there are ways to flexibilize the implementation of immigration in this country, but the way it is designed right now, it's just too hard and too inflexible. However, last comment, what we are living today is the consequence of the fact that this is an incredible economy. Our economy is so dynamic. I mean, look, they've been trying to cool it off, and the economy just keeps going and going. 519,000 jobs last month alone. Even with the interest rate going up and the government trying to do its best to cool it off, we know what our economy is. It's a vibrant economy that produces a lot of jobs, a lot of economic activity. But the immigration system, which is a solution, given the demographic changes that we're experiencing, would be a good solution. But it's not flexible enough. It's trying to force it. I think Congress ought to legislate on that. Looking beyond the 11 million, which is what Stan is talking about, I think that the next bill ought to include this kind of flexibility so that the decisions are not left up to Congress, given the political incentives that our legislators have.
Just really quickly, I think the elephant in the room too is border security. And I think something that's really interesting that's come about as a result of Title 42 and having the border closed is a lot of innovation on the border. So I'm from El Paso, and in El Paso, I'm seeing now the county government having an excellent relationship with law enforcement. Now they have a direct line with CBP, with ICE. They all fall under the Department of Homeland Security. Before 42, it was one man, Ruben Garcia at Annunciation House, that was working our migrant shelter to welcome asylum seekers and make sure they got to the final destination. Now the county government is taking charge there. So that kind of innovation, I think, is exciting, and it looks like the America that we want it to look like. But what's so great about Children at Risk and the work that I'm seeing now is to see innovation now in our own communities, right? Like seeing innovation in our classrooms and seeing people really putting in the work to make sure that our kids are transitioning well and doing well. So the now what also is to be engaged with us and care about the kids that are in your classrooms, in your neighborhoods. That's the work that we're doing, and it's really meaningful. So.
And I appreciate you bringing us back full circle to reminding us about the kids and the work that Children at Risk is doing. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and because you engaged with us and you are just, wonderful at what you do, and we so appreciate all of the work. I'm going to say a couple things, and I'm going to give Stan and Tony the last word. So one of the things that we've been talking about is what's the call to action? What can you do? Stay engaged, stay informed, reach out to your representatives, let them know how you feel about this. If you want to see some reform, if you like the idea of ID and tax, if it makes sense to you, stay engaged with us. If anyone wants to, first of all, reach me, Jody, would you raise your hand, please? My assistant, Jody, is right here. Anybody who wants to get in touch with me, to talk to Jody. We are going to be starting a monthly newsletter where we are keeping everyone aware of what's going on in the immigration community, linking to other organizations, linking to Rational Middle, all of this, so that as we have these gatherings, we can continue the conversation. If any of you know of other organizations that you are affiliated with that would be interested in and benefit from having a conversation like this, please reach out to us. We want to do more of these because this is the only way that we're going to make any progress, because clearly our leaders are not doing the job and we have to push them to do it. Stan, I'll give you the last comment that you want to leave with the audience, and then Tony's going to wrap us up.
I just appreciate you all taking the time and learning more about this very important issue. And I think we have snacks and...
Yes, there's a reception. You can smell the food. There's a reception and drinks in the lobby. We invite you to stay. And I actually have a camera crew here and would love to do some on-camera quick interviews with anybody who wants to say something about what you thought of today.
I see some educators in here, and I would really like to get to the senior classes of some of these high schools and talk to the kids that will be voting, because they really need to know about this issue. So
yeah,
we'll be available.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And Stan and I have actually gone to a class at Texas A&M, and talked about this issue. One of the classes will be going back sometime in the next couple of months. So it's important that, you know, we educate the young people, that we continue to educate among ourselves. And honey, next time I'm going to get the media here, okay? I promise.
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, Tony.
Yeah, well, pick your argument, whatever that may be, humanitarian, economic, labor market, because we've actually made a number of arguments before our Congress members, but the more important thing is whatever your argument may be, you gotta engage the politicians, because there's not going to be any change on immigration if it doesn't go through Congress. So figure out who your representative is, stay on them, and really, I mean, I think Stan has done it much longer than I have, but I've been on it for 20 years, and I can tell you that every time I can, I go up to Capitol Hill to visit Tony Gonzalez or Sheila McCormick or Cornyn or staffers, and I push the arguments and I tell them what is it that we're doing here and why they should act. And I know that sometimes it feels like that parable. I know Stan will understand that, I'm Catholic too, and I can tell you it's a parable. You throw the seed out there in the wind and you just don't know when it's going to take hold.
Very true.
We threw a lot of seeds today.
Yeah.
We did. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a good
Good
evening.
job, man. You
Enjoy
get
the
better and better.
refreshments. Thank you.
Good job, young lady.
Thank you.
You're off to a
Thanks
good